The forest was supposed to be a shield. Instead, it became a cage. The ravine floor was silent, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against the eardrums. 500 men huddled in shallow holes, pressed into the wet dirt, praying the fog wouldn't lift. If you enjoy uncovering the raw, unpolished history of the world wars, please take a second to subscribe as we head into the dark heart of the Argonne. Suddenly, the earth erupted. Dirt, shrapnel, and tree limbs shattered the air. But the men didn't reach for their rifles. They looked up in horror. The shells screaming down on them were not German. They were American. It was October 1918, the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the final grinding push of World War I. The orders were simple: advance into the Argonne forest and take the position. Major Charles White Whittlesey, a tall, bespectacled lawyer from New York, followed those orders to the letter. He led 9 companies of the 77th Division into a deep ravine. They pushed forward. They broke the German line. But the units on their left and right did not. By nightfall, the trap snapped shut. The Germans filtered in behind them, cutting the supply lines, cutting the communication wires, and sealing the ravine. Whittlesey and his men were alone. A pocket of blue uniforms drowning in a sea of field gray. Whittlesey adjusted his glasses. They were smeared with mud. He looked at his map, then at the steep slopes surrounding them. He realized the terrifying truth before anyone else. They weren't just cut off. They were the bait. He wrote in his field notebook, "We are held up. The situation is cutting us into ribbons. Men are suffering." The first night was cold. No blankets, no greatcoats, just the damp chill of the French autumn seeping into their bones. The men dug funk holes into the side of the ravine, scraping at the roots with bayonets and tin cups. They waited for runners to return with news of support. The runners never came back. At dawn, the German snipers started. The enemy occupied the high ground. They could look down into the American foxholes like children looking into a fishbowl. A man would move to tighten his bootlaces, and a crack would echo through the trees. He would slump over, gone before he hit the mud. "Keep your heads down," Whittlesey yelled, crawling from hole to hole. "Nobody moves unless necessary." Captain McMurtry, a tough, stocky officer, slid into the dirt beside the major. His face was grim. "We're out of food, Major." Whittlesey nodded, staring at the ridge line. "Water?" "Gone. The stream is covered by machine guns." "Tell them to chew on leaves," Whittlesey said. "We hold." The thirst became worse than the fear. Men stared at the muddy stream at the bottom of the ravine. It was only 30 yards away. It might as well have been a mile. One private couldn't take it. He scrambled out of his hole, canteen in hand. He made it 5 steps. A machine gun stuttered from the cliffs. The boy fell, the canteen rolling away, empty. The Germans taunted them. From the cliffs, voices drifted down in broken English. "Surrender, Yanks, you have no chance." "Come get some breakfast," the Americans answered with curses and sporadic rifle fire. But ammunition was running low. They had to count every bullet. They stripped the ammo belts off the dead to feed the guns of the living. Then came the artillery. On the second day, the ground began to shake. A distant thumping sound, familiar and comforting at first. American artillery. They were firing a barrage to clear the way. The men cheered. Then the first shell landed right in the center of their position. Bodies flew. Trees splintered into deadly wooden spears. The barrage wasn't clearing the way. It was walking directly over them. The coordinates were wrong. Whittlesey scrambled through the chaos. Dirt rained down on his helmet. He grabbed his signal officer. "The birds! Get the birds!" They had carrier pigeons, their only link to the outside world. The handler released the first bird with a message. It flew up, circled, and was immediately shot down by German marksmen. They released the second bird. A puff of feathers. It spiraled into the mud, one bird left. A pigeon named Cher. The artillery was tearing the battalion apart. Men were screaming, holding their ruined limbs, begging for it to stop. It was a slaughterhouse. Whittlesey wrote a message on a scrap of onion paper. His hand shook, but the letters were clear. We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it. He rolled the paper into the canister and clipped it to the bird's leg. Go, the handler whispered, tossing the bird into the air. Cher climbed. The Germans saw him. The air filled with lead. Bullets zipped past the small gray shape. Bang! The bird crumpled. It began to fall. The hearts of 500 men sank with it. If that bird died, they all died. But then, miraculously, the wings beat again. Cher leveled out. He was hit, bleeding, one leg hanging by a tendon, an eye gone. But he flew. He climbed higher, over the ridges, over the smoke, and vanished into the gray sky. 20 minutes later, the shelling stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. But the relief did not come. The Germans were furious. They knew the Americans were weak. They launched wave after wave of attacks. Grenades rolled down the hill into the foxholes. Flamethrowers licked the edges of the perimeter. Whittlesey never slept. He moved constantly. He had no food, no water, and he refused to take cover while his men were exposed. He was a lawyer, not a soldier by trade, but in that ravine, he became a statue of resolve. He found a young soldier crying in a hole, shaking uncontrollably. Son, Whittlesey said softly, I can't do it, Major. I can't die here. Whittlesey put a hand on the boy's shoulder. You won't. Look at me. We are not leaving. The boy wiped his face. He nodded. He picked up his rifle. By the fourth day, they were eating bandages. They were chewing on leather straps. The wounded were gangrenous. The smell of blood and rotting leaves was overpowering. A private wrote in his diary, It is nothing but death here. I have made my peace with God. I only hope my mother never knows how bad it was. Then, a strange sight. A German soldier appeared with a white flag. He walked confidently down the slope. The shooting stopped. He carried a letter. It was typed in perfect English, addressed to the commanding officer. Whittlesey took the letter. He read it standing in the open. The suffering of your wounded men can be heard over here in the German lines, it read. We appeal to your humane sentiments. Surrender. You are surrounded. There is no escape. Whittlesey looked at the German officer. He looked at his men. Gaunt, starving, bleeding, eyes hollowed out by trauma. Surrender meant food. It meant water. It meant life. But surrender also meant breaking. Whittlesey folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He didn't say a word to the German. He turned to his signal officer. Pull in the white panels, he ordered. The white panels were used to signal aircraft. Whittlesey wanted to make sure that not a single scrap of white cloth was visible from the air. He didn't want anyone, friend or foe, to think for even a second that the 77th was giving up. Sir, the reply? The German asked. Whittlesey looked at him. You have your reply. The German turned and ran. Whittlesey walked down the line. He looked at his men. Get ready, he said. They're coming. The attack that followed was the fiercest yet. The Germans threw everything they had at the pocket. They wanted to erase this stubborn stain from their forest. The Americans fought with pistols, with bayonets, with shovels. When the ammo ran dry, they used rocks. They fought with the desperation of men who had already accepted death. Night fell. The firing slowed. Whittlesey sat against a tree stump. He cleaned his glasses. He was exhausted beyond words. Then a sound. Not a Mauser rifle, not a German grenade. A shout in English. "Hang on, we're coming through." It came from the south, the 307th Infantry. They had broken the line. Shadows emerged from the trees. But this time, they wore the flat-brimmed helmets of the U.S. Army. They brought food. They brought water. They brought stretchers. The relief soldiers stopped dead when they saw the men of the Lost Battalion. They looked like ghosts rising from the grave. Their uniforms were shredded, their faces black with grime, their eyes staring 1,000 yards away. Major Whittlesey stood up. He straightened his tunic. He saluted the relieving officer. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. 554 men had walked into that ravine. Only 194 were able to walk out. The rest were carried on stretchers or left behind in the shallow graves dug into the French mud. Major Whittlesey was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was called a national hero. Parades were thrown in his honor. He was the most famous soldier in America. But the ravine never left him. According to those who knew him, he was haunted. He attended the funerals of his men. He visited the wounded in hospitals. He gave away the money he made from speeches to the families of the fallen. In 1921, 3 years after the battle, Charles Whittlesey booked passage on a steamship to Havana. On the first night of the voyage, he dined with the captain. He was polite. He was calm. He excused himself to go to his cabin. He was never seen again. He left behind a series of letters to his family and friends. And then he stepped off the rail of the ship into the dark Atlantic Ocean. The war had ended in 1918. But for the commander of the Lost Battalion, the noise of the Argonne never stopped. If you believe these stories need to be remembered, subscribe to the channel. We are building an archive of the brave. War creates legends. It builds statues. But it breaks the men who have to live inside the legend. Major Whittlesey saved his men. But he could not save himself.